Right then, this is a video that I'm doing. I've done a couple of them now, and it's to do with fuel economy. This particular video is for a Honda Civic 1.6 diesel. The reason I'm doing these videos is just for a bit of fun really, as much as anything else, but also because when we get obviously the manufacturer's claims, we've learnt to take them with a pinch of salt. But also, the same comes with car road tests. The reason being that most car magazines or, like sort of Autocar and these sort of people, the testers get in them and drive them, let's say, enthusiastically. And surprise, surprise, they never come up with the same sort of economy which you would hope or expect the car to get. So it always leaves me a bit disappointed in the cars. So what I'm doing now is, most people when they buy a diesel car or cars of certain types will drive them in a manner befitting the type of car they bought for the reasons they bought it. So if you're buying a diesel, you generally drive them in a manner that where you hope to get good economy out of the car. You're not going to be racing around flooring it everywhere to extract the best out of the chassis, or sliding it through corners, or it's not what you're hoping to get from the car. So what I'm going to do is completely unscientific. So there's all sorts of holes you can pull it apart in so many ways, but I'm going to do it on these back roads initially. Then I'm going to do a section, probably about 8 miles or so of motorway, and then I'm going to come back down the other side on an A road, which basically runs parallel to the motorway, and do a loop and just see what I get in what I call in a real world situation. The one thing I'll stick my hand up straight away and say, obviously this doesn't include kind of city driving. This is for, if you say, people like me may live out in the country, or where a lot of your driving is open road. So it's to sort of mimic that. So a couple of things with fuel economy, and what I'm going to do on the road test. So I'm going to drive it normally. I'm not going to try and drive it ridiculously economically. It means I will stick to the speed limits, however, because I think that's fair to the manufacturers. I mean, if you want to drive it, a zillion miles an hour down the motorway and then wonder why you're not getting the fuel economy the manufacturers claim, then there's a good reason for it. If you stick to 70 miles an hour, that's what they stick to, obviously, on their road tests and the claims they then make. I'm also going to drive it in a manner that I think most people would drive it, but also just give a kind of, if I can, any kind of tips to getting good economy out of the cars, or the way I get the economy out of my car, certainly, because I've had lots and lots of these Civic diesels. First things first, about a million things down the line. I've started this car from stone cold. It's quite a very cold morning. It's only 1 degree outside. It's quite a foggy day, so it's probably the worst you can be for the car. But again, I'm trying to do the worst it can do, not the best. In that sense, what I'm going to do now is basically just run through the obvious things you should do with any car. Tyre pressures, obviously vitally important to getting good fuel economy. Just sticking with the manufacturer's tyre pressures, which is what I've done on this car. I've not pumped them up rock hard to get good fuel economy. So again, if you're struggling to get the economy out of your car, then just look for certain things. The obvious one to check is your fuel economy. Then, if you're still struggling, but it's actually got worse over a period of time, the next port of call would ordinarily be your air filter for the engine. If that's blocked up, the engine will be struggling to get the air through. So that's a good port of call. And then finally, again, if you're still struggling, again, after a trip, but very carefully, so don't burn yourself with anything like that, put your hand on each individual wheel after a trip, on the alloy wheel, towards the centre of the wheel, and just see if one or any of them are sort of warm or hot. So that would suggest you've got a brake binding, which is easily attended to, generally speaking. So those are the things to kind of look for on a regular basis. So getting the economy out of these cars, you've got a couple of little things on the Civics which help. Obviously, you've got a gear change prompt, a little green light pings up each time just to remind you actually it's about time you want to change gear. The reality is diesels are incredibly torquey engines. That's the nature of them. So getting them up to speed at a reasonable rate of knots helps. So don't sort of dawdle about like you're driving a petrol car. I change up with these just above or just about 2000 RPM, which is when the prompt actually comes, because that's when you got the most torque from the engine, the turbos spinning up, and it means when you change up, it's not going to struggle. You're not going to get turbo lag. You're not going to sort of put your foot down and have nothing, because again, that's not good, because you're going to have to put your foot down for longer and harder. So just you get used to it when you drive the cars. By the way, it's something that becomes second nature. You feel it through. You can hear it, you can feel it, you just know it becomes second nature, as I said. And so I've had enough of these to know that that's exactly when they'll be happy to sort of change up. And then, so I'm now 50 miles an hour, which is the limit along this particular section of road. 6th gear, the engine's perfectly happy. It's revving at around about 1500 RPM. Much below that, let's say, I don't know, sort of 45 miles per hour, the engine might start short. You might want to be in 5th gear at that point, but at the moment it's been very happy in 6th. So that's the way to get, ultimately the best economy. Get yourself in as high a gear as the engine is happy to go along with. Smooth throttle applications, looking ahead to see if there's cars braking in the distance. So rather than braking, taking your foot off the throttle and almost coasting towards it, using the engine braking, because every time you hit the brake pedal, of course, you are basically sacrificing the fuel you used to get up to that speed. So what we're going to do in a second, I'm going to be getting onto the motorway, so we're not far from it now. I'll give a quick update as to where I am fuel economy wise up to that point, and then I will give an update as I'm coming off the motorway. So I'm not going to talk to you through the whole of the trip, because that'd be incredibly tedious. These, as you've probably noticed, they have this auto stop facility. Again, it does save fuel when you're sat in traffic like now, having the engine turning over. A, it's noisy, but B, obviously you are using more fuel. They also have this little economy mode button on there. It's slightly softer on the throttle response, cuts the air conditioning down to a lower mode, and again draws less power off the engine. It doesn't make a massive difference in my experience. Maybe sort of just over 1, maybe 2 mpg. Others might find that slightly different to that. I don't know, but that's what I tend to get from the cars. So we're coming up to the start of the M5 now. Currently that's 4.8 miles, slightly uphill, stone cold engine, and it was 50 miles per gallon dead on. So that's pretty much what I would have expected at that point anyway. You can, if traffic allowing, again, just sort of tips for the economy, it said it's the on and off the throttle that cars don't like. That's when they tend to use their most fuel. So on the motorway, if it's clear enough, you've got cruise control on lots of cars now. Cruise control is brilliant. It means you're not constantly going on and off, but the nature of British roads, different time of travel, means that you might find you are using more fuel. You're not able to use the cruise control, rather. And again, that brings me back to this road test. It is unscientific, as I said. One thing I would say is that I'm driving the car now. It's just about 9:30. Rush hour's been and gone. Not that we get much of rush hour around here. If you're driving in nose to tail traffic, 7 o'clock in the morning, you obviously won't get the same sort of economy because you can't. It's impossible to do so. So don't expect it to in that sense. Right, so we are now on the motorway. I'll just get past this lorry in a second, get myself up to speed, and I'm going to, if possible, set this cruise control. So 70 miles an hour, it's set. Currently 48.2 miles per gallon, and I'll check in once I've finished the motorway section. Right then, so I'm about to come off the motorway now, and as promised, I'll give an update on the fuel economy. The economy is up to 56 miles per gallon now, and we've done 17 miles. What's noticeable is as the engine's warmed up, the economy bar is going further and further up. So obviously, like any diesel, high compression engine, the cold really does make them struggle more a little bit. So it takes them a little bit longer to warm up than a petrol engine, but I say we're up to 56.2 currently, and what I'll do is I'm going to be coming down the A38, so as I said, parallel to the M5, and I will give an update at that point, so a little bit further along the road. Right then, so a quick update. A little bit further down the A38 now, we're up to 27 miles done, MPG's up to 60. Traffic's been quite heavy actually, so on and off. Just a usual mix of roundabouts, traffic lights, the usual bits and bobs you'd expect on any main road. So again, sort of fairly representative of what I'd hope it to be. And I'll give final update as I'm sort of getting a little bit closer to the end of the route. Right, so literally just pulled off the A38. This is a slightly different way back into the village where we started from, albeit I still benefit from the fact that it's slightly downhill. Obviously the first part of the trip was very noticeably uphill. Current MPG 62.7, and we get the benefit of a little bit of downhill for the last couple of miles on the way back. So really kind of sort of assessment of what you'd expect to get. This is about right. This is you can get more. You drive even more economically, drive a bit slower, definitely, because obviously it definitely shows up the difference in people who are sort of more heavy on their right foot, especially at motorway speeds, because it becomes a kind of law of diminishing returns. The difference between 65 and 70 miles per gallon mph on the motorway is not a huge amount in terms of MPG, but you start trying to go beyond 70 miles an hour to sort of the speed at which some people drive, and you do see a sort of a noticeable dip, but that affects all cars, not just Civic 1.6 diesels, obviously. So it's quite good in the sense, because it does kind of, A, it keeps your licence intact, B, you should be sticking to the speed limits, obviously, but also it's good for the car, it's good for the economy, it's good for the longevity of the engine, the mechanicals, all the other bits of the car, and actually in a bizarre way it makes it a lot more relaxing. I'm not going to sort of become all kind of preachy about it, but I do find when I do these videos, I think, well, actually, if I'd been in a hurry and gained a couple of minutes, you come back sort of anxious and stressed, whereas you drive like this, it's actually quite nice. You just watch the world go by a little bit more, take a bit more in as well. But it is a common thing I do get asked about the cars, and obviously the cars that we sell. And we do try and be sort of, we do. We're honest about the MPGs we think people will get, because the first question I ask people is, where do you live? What's your driving? What's your commute? So if someone's doing this sort of a mix of driving, they will get sort of 60-ish MPG fairly easily. Someone who's got a really gentle trip up a bit of dual carriageway every day at 50-ish miles an hour will be up to 70 miles per gallon. It's as simple as that. It's where you drive, but obviously very important is how it's driven. It's simple as that. Because I always say the first thing to look for, don't look for faults on a car necessarily if you're not achieving the economy you're getting out of a new car. First thing to look at is yourself. Am I driving this? If I'm honest about it, when I'm on the motorway, what speeds am I driving? On the main roads, am I getting into those high gears earlier, or am I labouring it in much lower gears? Because there's a tendency, especially people going from having had a petrol car to a diesel, they don't initially use the torque of the engine. They'll still be inclined to hold it in a lower gear far longer than in reality is sensible for the economy of the car. But as I said at the start, to harp on about it, but it isn't scientific. It's I'm trying to give a sort of the best kind of real world feel that I possibly can. Cold mornings, if this was done on a summer's day, I'd definitely get slightly better economy. There's no two ways about it. You wouldn't have that prolonged period of time, especially the first part of the trip, because I know that section that we did where before we got to the motorway, which was about 50 miles per gallon, on a summer's day I'll be sort of close to the 60 actually, but it's just how long the engine takes to warm up. But I've pretty much come to where we started the trip from. The total is 34.1 miles. That's the total distance travelled, and the MPG is now just touching 64 miles per gallon. As I said, it's reasonably accurate, that's all I'll say. And if it's been of any help to anybody, that's absolutely brilliant. If not, just ignore it completely.